In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern where we are looking at multiple upcoming major snowstorms. Our first one appears to be more of a deep south into the very southern mid-Atlantic snowstorm. I'm talking North Carolina, Virginia for the mid-Atlantic, even into the Delmarva. For the deeper south, more like northern South Carolina, northern Georgia, northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, areas of Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, maybe even a bit of Louisiana being impacted. This winter storm will feature some snowfall, some freezing rain, some sleet. It's going to be a messy system for a lot of folks, but it's going to fill out a lot of these areas that have not really seen a lot of snowfall over the last few years. After this snowstorm, we are beginning to see signs of different timeframes to watch for signals, some of which are hinting at the fact that they could move up the coast. But I want to remind you guys that this storm that now is not expected to move up the coast was originally expected to move up the coast. So we got to take it with a grain of salt. We've seen the trend with the models. We've seen the trend that they like to pull it up the coast. And then as time goes on, it seems to be a more suppressed system with our first two snowstorms of January. So will that trend continue? Will it not? That's still a question mark because it doesn't mean everything, but it could be a hint as to what could be happening here in the near future. Outside of that, we have seen some model guidance come in for the longer range. We've been over the last few days talking about what does the time frame after the 20th really look like. And I want to let you guys know that it is coming in and it's looking very, very cold for after the 15th in particular. So I think January is just downright going to go down as a very, very cold month for most of the East. I mean, it's looking like inevitable at this point. February is still definitely a question mark. But for the later portion of January, that is looking more and more optimistic as time goes on. It never really looked bad, but it was, of course, a question mark because it was kind of outside of range. But now it's appearing like we're going to see a lot of the same in terms of cold air for the later portion of January as we did and have been seeing for this earlier portion. So let's dive into things. I want to take a look at what the Climate Prediction Center is saying as of now. And this is for the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, January 14th through 18th. Valid today. So this came out today, or it's not valid today, it's issued today, valid for the 14th through the 18th. And what we see here is a higher confidence of cold here in the southeast. I don't know why this is yellow. Let's change that real quickly. So this area here is looking to be very, very cold. And this is a lot of the same of what we saw in early January, if you remember. Well, we're in it right now, but I mean, this is basically what we've been seeing models hint at over time, what the Climate Prediction Center has eyeballed, and now we're seeing the kind of middle portion looking this way. As far as precipitation goes, we do look a little drier along the eastern seaboard. There is storm signals during this time frame that we're going to track, but this seems to be a quieter time. The central states seem to be where we have the best chance of breaking even at about normal or above average for a lot of these areas. And then once again, quite dry along the west coast. When we look at our new 8 to 14 day outlook for January 16th through 22nd, so again, trickling from the mid-range of January into that later portion now, we can see colder air also for this eastern area being expected. So this really feels like the trend here for January overall. Precipitation during this time looks a little bit more optimistic though. And really what this looks like to me is maybe they're expecting quite a bit of the same with some more southern slider type storms moving through. Maybe we get one of these to kind of pull up a little bit more up the coast perhaps as they've kind of got near normal conditions throughout these areas. And maybe we get a couple that cut through as well, bringing more of the Midwest and Ohio Valley, some snowfall. So these are some areas to watch. Kind of what we've seen so far in January is what I'm looking at here on this 8 to 14 day outlook. It looks like they're expecting quite a bit of that to be possible. Again, coupled with the below average temperatures in here, this should spell some snowfall again, especially in this middle portion of the east, which once again is what we've already seen throughout January. The trend tends to be your friend. When we look at the 3 to 4 week outlook, we're going to get another one of these in 2 days. This is from January 3rd, so a little outdated, but this is their 18th through 31st outlook. And as you can see, they were expecting cold in the east basically all the way back on the 3rd, with warmth along the west and a little bit of warmth along New England, which has really been the case actually already through January. It hasn't been too impactful because their average temperatures are so low that even slightly above average temperatures tend to be really, really cold. But that is technically a little bit above average up there. When we look at the precipitation later on in the month, and they were never really calling for above average precipitation in the short range, but they have been kind of eyeballing a more favorable period of eastern, specifically coastal storms moving up. So perhaps we eventually move into something like that for late January. But once again, this was made on the 3rd, so this is quite outdated, and we will get a much better perspective here in just a couple of days, which I cannot wait to see. The monthly outlook looks a lot like the same. I mean, cold in the east overall for the month, which I think is absolutely going to verify. Warm in the west, that's going to verify. And then the precipitation, I think this is phenomenal. I think maybe they overdid it here in the northwest, so I would say maybe we're going to end up being a little lower than that. These areas certainly going to be above average, it appears. And then maybe I would have extended that down a little further this way. But overall, check mark there. Above average in the northeast, a little questionable. So I'm going to give that an X for now. I think that this area actually would be the better place to have placed that above average precipitation, as they've already seen this storm move through like this. We're getting another one kind of moving up into the region as well. And maybe some models showing more precipitation in this area coming up, so we'll track that here in a second. First off, here's how the past 7 days have gone. This is now the 2nd through the 8th of January. We have to wait until the 10th until we can upgrade from the 7-day period to the 10-day period, but it does appear very much so like their monthly outlook, like I mentioned, below average, particularly from the northern plains and Midwest into this mid-Atlantic and southeast region. Warm along the west, so we call this a positive PNA, which this really drives the cold air into the east, so it's more of a driving force as opposed to something that's affected and caused by the cold in the east. It's actually the opposite, so the warmth in the west causes the cold to move into the east, not the other way around. And again, more neutral to above average here in the northeast compared to the other eastern areas. Now let's dive into the European model. This is your 12Z European model run from today. It's our most up-to-date full European model run at the time of recording, and what we're going to see here and be watching for here just tomorrow afternoon is the formation of our storm here. Any changes in the track that happen with this storm here will likely be picked up during this time as we get that valuable data. Obviously, a lot of this happening over the United States. We have excellent weather stations all over the place, and they'll be able to see where that low pressure exactly is, even some offshore stuff. Being able to pick up on the pressure, where everything's lining up, and that's going to be implemented into the models. And I think tomorrow's model runs is where we're going to really finalize the information for this storm once everything's kind of coming together here sometime tomorrow morning into tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to see the models either kind of stick with what they're saying if everything goes according to plan, or adjust based on any differences when this storm forms. The biggest period of, I would say, confusion in the models is going to be when the storm hasn't even formed yet. When that storm hasn't even formed yet, it makes it pretty hard for the models to predict where it's going to go, because you need to know that area of origination precisely to predict that moving forward. But again, tomorrow's a very, very big day because of that. We do see snowfall starting out for tomorrow afternoon, again, Thursday, January 9th, for Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Can you imagine? I just thought about this. I know I always end up talking about college football, but I know the Texas Ohio State game is going to be held in Dallas. Could you imagine? Well, I guess it's an AT&T stadium, so my bad. It's an indoor game, but still, I mean, interesting. I guess if it is an outdoor game, that'd be a lot more interesting. I thought I had a really good point there, but that was not a good point. So a little bit of a blunder there by me. My bad, guys. Friday here on January 10th, when that game is actually being held, it will be very cold, but again, indoors. We do see the snowfall spreading throughout these northern deep south states, so like northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, northern Georgia. I could see, obviously, there being some sleet, some freezing rain, and snow, kind of a combination. But things in the east have been so cold, it's kind of a unique situation where I feel like accumulation of whatever frozen precipitation is not going to be very hard to come by. I have a lake in my backyard here in Virginia, and it is starting to freeze as of this morning, and I'm sure that by tonight we're going to have a solid freeze over it. And over the coming nights, that's only going to worsen, and the ground is pretty much the same. We had flakes a few days ago, and I was actually out in Portsmouth, Virginia today, for any of you from Portsmouth, Virginia, and there was still ice. It was like above 32 during the day today, but still in the gutters, there was just, or in the kind of sides of the roads, there was solid ice still in there. So even though it's getting up to like 34, 35, 36, it's not enough to outdo the lower 20 nights. And the ground is going to be frigid in a lot of these areas for this storm. So for these areas that are used to what I'm probably used to, which is melting at first, even if it's pure snow, and then it takes a couple hours and then it finally sticks, I don't think we're going to see anything like that with this system. I think that unless you're seeing rain ahead of this, which might just freeze, by the way, so that's going to be a big factor. But let's say it rains and it's actually just wet and not freezing, then maybe you'll have some trouble getting accumulation. But as far as the ground temperatures go, I really feel like this one is going to start to accumulate immediately, as that ground is just frigid. So again, those areas, Tennessee, Kentucky, even southern Illinois, southern Indiana, Missouri, areas that have just seen snowfall with the previous system, kind of cashing in, so the rich get richer in this kind of system and pattern we're in. Even Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, I know these areas did not as much Pennsylvania, but southern Ohio into West Virginia did phenomenal with the previous storm. And what we see is that this storm really rides to the south, not even as far north as the Outer Banks. So we're pretty far south here. And I live kind of in this circle here, southeastern Virginia, obviously. So I've been paying extra close attention today about these models. And I think that perhaps, I could be wrong, of course, but I think for earlier on in the morning, this is 7 a.m., but for the timing around like 1 to 4 a.m., I think they're really overdoing the mixing on the northern end of this. I might be biased. It sounds like I'm biased right now. It sounds like I'm coping, but what I've been seeing when I'm looking at all the different layers is that we're pretty much below freezing at every layer, at least on the Virginia side of things. And they have that sleet and mixing, not as much the European model, but like the GFS and the NAM, they're pushing that way to the north. I really feel like we might not struggle with that quite as bad as that grouping of model is showing. It's two teams with this storm. We have the NAM and the GFS kind of showing a little bit more northward with the track of the storm. And not only that, with the rain snow line, the primary rain snow line. And then we have the European model, the Canadian model family, which the Canadian isn't known for being good, the CMC, but the RGEM model is a phenomenal short-range model for situations like this. So the Canadian model family is further south like this European model. The Icon model has been back and forth. That's not really notorious for being a great model, but it is in that grouping. So we have these southern ones, and then we have kind of that northern group. And I think, again, I've been a little wordy here in the beginning of this video, but I think that tomorrow is when it all comes together, and we're not going to have these two groups anymore. We're going to have one concise group with all the models being relatively close together. They are pretty close already, but I think we're going to even narrow that gap here by tomorrow morning, maybe the 12Z runs tomorrow. So we'll have a lot of updates tomorrow with the models when we go over the video, but I think it's going to come around to show something very similar to this. Obviously, the European model, some people call it the King Euro. It is known for being the best model, but sometimes the GFS model's right and the European model's wrong. But I would say 7 out of 10 times it leans more in the direction of the Euro. So, but you never know when you're in one of those 3 out of 10 situations. And when you are, you kind of get caught off guard. So that's why we consider every single one. As time goes on, we see that storm goes ahead and moves out, does not move up the coast. We talked about it yesterday, how it could either move up the coast or kind of slide right off. And we're seeing that sliding right off becoming almost certainty at this point. We've seen the models tick south consistently over the last couple of days, and they've all kind of agreed on this sliding off the coast. It's just, is it a little further north when it's sliding off the coast, or is it a little further south? And trust me, it's pretty little. It mostly makes a difference as far as that rain snow line, much less about, more northern areas seeing snowfall or not. It's kind of becoming closer to being out of the question at this point. But I always preach, consider all possibilities, so we will continue to do that, of course. Sunday, we do get a little bit of a warm-up, so some warmer air pushing up the coast here for Sunday as that storm moves out. The coldest temperatures seem to be over the Rockies and Plains here by this point, but we're really just recharging. All of this is kind of your polar vortex energy up here in Canada, and this is all going to recycle and bring colder air back. So let's take a look at what happens as we move into Monday, and all of it's kind of moving eastward again. Guess this, we have a low between the Hudson Bay and the Great Lakes, which has been a very telling feature of cold air moving into the east so far this year that we've been really watching here on the channel. As we move forward through Monday, we do have some snow showers around, some lake effect snowfall. I would say it's lake effect enhanced snowfall. We do have low pressure overhead, but the lakes are certainly adding fuel to that. Obviously, we've seen so much lake effect snowfall this year. I think they're probably just running out of energy at this point. I'm hearing word that some of the Great Lakes that do freeze are getting pretty close to that point. So we don't have that warm water to work with quite as much anymore, but there's just enough juice left that we do get a little bit of we're squeezing the lemon pretty dry here, but we're getting a little bit of enhancement from it, I would say, with this situation. And then as time goes on, we get a deeper cool down around the 15th, 16th, and look at the PNA out west. Very, very large and abundant warm up out west. And this is going to just force a very violent cool down into the east if we see something that expansive set up. It really just funnels it in, funnels it right in down the east coast. And any storm, we're not really expecting storms during this time frame, but they would be really deep south, really deep south. If we saw anything, we would be talking very far to the south along that jet stream. As time goes on, we don't see any storms. We get a brief little pause. We get a little bit of a warm up, and then here comes another storm system for the 19th. So again, after this storm, we do hit a little bit of a drier period, just like what we saw on the 6 to 10 day outlook from the National Weather Service at the beginning of the video. I think another thing that's worth noting is this storm does originate in a very similar area to the one that we're seeing now. So we're getting kind of into a pattern where we're seeing the Gulf be able to implement its energy here. We get some of this kind of Pineapple Express moving off the Pacific straight into the Texas area, and we're getting our lows forming in this pocket. It doesn't mean the outcome is going to be the same, although this does look eerily similar to our upcoming storm. But we're seeing the troughs kind of dip and then origin in the east. It's picking up the moisture here as a low forms, and then everything kind of moves eastward, including the cold. So let's see what happens as we move towards this is Sunday afternoon, and here's by Monday morning. It's a very quick mover again, which this upcoming one is as well. This one on this model right now, which keep in mind it's over 10 days out, is further north, and we do have a heavier snow system overall. So this would be a mid-Atlantic special if this exact scenario played out, which again rarely happens at the 10-day range. So we basically, the takeaway here is that there is a storm signal and there is cold. I said this with our system that's happening now when we were talking about it all the way in December, and that turned out correct. I said, hey, look, the models are showing a snowstorm on the 10th, 11th time frame. We don't know the amounts, the timing, anything, but we are pretty confident that there is going to be a storm and there's going to be cold air, and lo and behold, that's the situation we find ourselves in. And does it look exactly the same? Absolutely not, but nobody even tried to pretend like it would look exactly the same because it's incredibly rare, if not impossible, to look precisely the same. But it's very easy to find these storm signals for potential snowstorms and give people dates to watch for. We're looking at the 19th, 20th time frame, and that's going to need to be a date to be watched in here because we're getting the model starting to pick up on a storm signal. So keep that in mind. Storm signal, cold, it could be okay, so for the rain snow lines here, it could be down here, it could be here. I mean, we could see something where it's like over the coast like this and we get all snow on this side. So that line could change a lot, but the fact that we have a ton of cold air, we have a storm moving in, tells me that there will be a snow system for somebody during this time frame, and that's the useful information we can get in the long range. What follows this system is very, very cold air. Once again, dealing with very deep cold air, a very stacked positive PNA, and what I mean by that is it's stretching up into that Canadian western coastline, and that causes the cold to just want to deep dive even further south, basically. So more cold for this after 20th time frame is the consensus at this point. And again, remember I told you if a storm moved along a jet stream this far south, it'd be very deep south. Take this with a grain of salt. This is first off like almost 15 days out and showing something incredibly rare. That's a bad combo when it comes to models. That is a very bad combo to bet on. But just out of curiosity, if a storm does form and we have a trough this deep diving, this is what you get. Something very incredibly rare, but not impossible. Very interesting. But another storm signal. The changes could be that we get a softer trough. And if that's the case, you take this storm and likely it moves up similarly to how we've seen our storms moving. And if the jet stream is more vertical up the coast, the storm could track up the coast. If it's moving offshore like it is here, you would expect to see something similar to what we're seeing with our upcoming storm where it moves off the coast. But again, 20th, 19th to 20th, and now even talking about the 22nd, 23rd. So we could enter into a more stormy pattern, which once again, the Climate Prediction Center was showing on their 3 to 4 week outlook. So maybe they were onto something with this stormier look, especially along the coast. Once we reach kind of that like 18th through 27th time frame approximately. But who knows? The longer this goes on, as far as like the further into this we get, the less confident we become. I would say between days 12 and 15, storm signals could completely dissipate, obviously, and just become nothing. So that becomes a range where we're talking about potential storm signals, not even just storm signals as a fact. So keep that in mind. And same thing with major troughs, beyond the 10-day mark. It's definitely a potential and possibility, but we can't take it as gospel because we do see them sometimes change pretty significantly during that, 10, 12, 15-day range. As we take a look at the GFS model's perspective, this upcoming storm, very similar on the western end of things. What we see is this aggressive look of mixed precipitation. We have a low much further to the north. This jet stream is much more vertical, I would say. What's weird is it's flatter down here, so we're seeing kind of a spreading out of this. So we get kind of a looser look, and this definitely would maybe slow down the storm. It would have more wiggle room for sure in that type of a pattern. But looking at the upper air temperatures, I think that this is a little aggressive with how wide of an area, especially to the north, like talking about Richmond and Williamsburg. I don't know if we'll deal with quite as much mixing as this model is showing. Of course, anything is possible, and we could see models trend in this direction tomorrow once the storm forms. But as of now, looking at the full model and all the products and everything, I really feel like this could be overdoing it compared to your European model. Who would have thought maybe the European model is better than the GFS? As we keep going, though, we see that storm moves out. We get that brief warm-up, so right on par with what the European model showed. We get a cool down for the 15th, 16th, nothing near as aggressive during that time frame, and then we actually get a Midwest storm. That storm brings in a cold front that does pull in major cold air. And we do get a snow system, but it's very transient. And what I mean is we have this stretching cold front, and it is moving almost directly eastward. So this would be quick, probably heavy as far as snowfall, but because of the quickness, the potential would be limited. I could imagine, especially the 10-day range, that this could become something more of a low moving up the coast with this much energy around. And if that's the case, then you could be talking about more impacts. But I don't want anybody to get too excited with this bullseye from DC all the way up through like Philly, New York City, and into New England look. This is going to be short-lived on this particular scenario and probably pretty minimal, but we do end up in that very cold pattern. We get a bit of a Miller B nor'easter that starts out as a clipper, moves down as a weaker storm, and what we're going to watch is it moves off the coast and then turns into a nor'easter offshore. Traditional nor'easters, which we call a Miller A, would originate a lot where our storms that we're tracking are moving off of, like off the coast here, and then they move all the way up. So watch this Miller B play out again. It's going to follow a track something like this, and we'll watch it move down, and it intensifies as it gets close to the coast, and then becomes a little something more there for the East Coast, as you can see. And it builds up and then eventually moves out as well, with very cold air still around for the 24th with a very healthy looking positive PNA. So definitely a lot to track here. Now, as we take a look at the total precipitation, very, very lackluster out west, which is unfortunate with all the terrible wildfires out there in Southern California. I know they could use all the precipitation they could get, but I don't really have good news for all of you out there. Really, this is a very dry look. We look at the most active area here, and I really would pinpoint it in this area here, and that's just because our one storm moves through here, and this model also has a couple of other deeper south storms like this moving through, so it just wants to bring the storm straight through the same area, so probably above average for some of these areas, and most everywhere else should be below average. So let's take a look, and sure enough, I mean, far below average for the west, far below average. Well, not far below average, but below average for the Midwest, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, and same story for the Northeast and even Mid-Atlantic. This storm is not the most major in the world for these areas. We're talking mostly in terms of 2 to 4 inches of snowfall, maybe 3 to 6. So that wouldn't be enough liquid precipitation to take them into the above average category. So still relatively dry for these areas, even the further south you go here. Really a dry look unless you're nearby the origination area of all of these lows this model shows. Total snowfall on the European model, again, these are a little bit more speculative, so take this with a grain of salt. This Gulf Coast crusher, or whatever you want to call it, very, very unlikely at this point because of the range, the rarity of the event. Those two things combined, again, very, very, very speculative if somebody's going to run with this at this point. But for these areas here, we get 2 snowstorms moving almost very, very similarly. And when we move back to see just the first snowstorm, this is what we see. Again, moves up something like this. And we end up getting a swath of decent snowfall in a lot of these areas here. And when we add our second snowstorm on this model, we see it's almost going to be identical, just a little further north. I'll add this in, and we see that second one. Maybe I need to add this. Let's see what we're doing here. Yeah, so this is the second snowstorm, and we can see it's very, very similar, probably just slightly further north with the track over time. And we end up with a better mid-Atlantic snow system for some of these folks that just had their snowstorm a couple days ago. This would be kind of similar amounts, more south based on the west end. So interesting, but again, the trend is your friend. Then here is that Gulf Coast crusher, which again, very, very, very likely will not occur. When we take a look at the total precipitation again, I don't know where that came from. Let's take a look at the Okay, let's take a look at the, I don't know what's going on here. Let's take a look at the European models, zoomed in snowfall in the east, just so we can get some ideas of amounts. I actually want to take a look just at your first snowstorm. I feel like this is more useful. But again, these are a little underdone. When we look at the 10-to-1 ratio snowfall, I don't know why Kutra is lower in this instance. Everybody talks about how Kutra ratios are always too high, but we actually see more realistic totals when we look at the 10-to-1 ratio here, actually more snowfall. And likely we're probably taking a look, it's going to be in the upper 20s, lower 30s. So, you know, you're talking 10-to-1, maybe like 11-to-1, 12-to-1, something like that. So this is probably what we're looking at, something around this mark. And we see a good 2 or 3 inches through the bullseye swath. And actually the 18Z European model run is in range for this storm, and it did tick north very, very slightly, and it did increase the amounts very slightly, much more in line with that 2 to 4 inch amount, again, for northern North Carolina, southeastern Virginia areas. And we could see for the Gulf states, higher amounts, 2 to 4, even 4 to 6, 6 to 8 in these purple areas. So very, very high totals for these regions. When we take a look at the GFS model's total snowfall, we get multiple snowstorms in here as well. But we get a couple tracking up the coast. So you start to talk about an area where your first storm, a little more north-based, and then we start to get them up the coast. The unique thing about this situation, we talked about this much earlier in the year, where the GFS model tends to have a southeast bias, where it's actually placing storms a little too far southeast. Right now, it's like the northwest model. It just shows everything further northwest than any other model. So it's really interesting to see it doing this. When its bias is typically the very opposite. If everything else was further north than it, then I would be telling you guys, hey, I think the GFS model is probably too far to the south with it, but how can we say that when it's the most north model out there right now with these systems? Very, very interesting stuff. When we zoom into the east here, we do see, again, over the course of 3 or so snowstorms in here, we do get pretty high totals for the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, parts of the Ohio Valley. I do want to take us back to look just at our first snowstorm. And again, it's a little further north with a lot of this in the Mid-Atlantic. We get some here for more central Virginia into the Delmarva. Still, these areas see snowfall. They just start to get sleet. Again, talking about how the model shows almost mixed precipitation or rain the entire storm for my neck of the woods in southeast Virginia. But the snowfall totals, when we're looking at it, actually end up being much more in line with what it would be if it almost snowed the entire storm. So I feel like something's up there. 10-to-1 ratio, again, even adds more on the southern end. So that's probably accounting for some of the sleet that this model is showing. It's kind of adding in that and counting it as snow in the 10-to-1. Another reason why I love Kuchera, because it tries to kind of deduct that. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff for this North model for some reason, and we will see who's right at the end of the day, right? So let's take a look at the European models temperature pattern. We're very cold now, and we're going to be very cold for quite a while here. We stay that way until it appears like maybe between the 13th and 14th we get a very brief warm up in front of another even more brutal cooldown that moves in for the 15th, 16th, 17th. Another very brief warm up for like the 18th, 19th, 20th before again more brutal air arrives for the 19th, 20th, 21st. This is crazy. 22nd, 23rd, straight to the end of the model run. So you know, when I don't have the 15-day temperature anomalies, but here's the 10-day one at the end of the model run, and it's clear that this would be just like free-flowing cold air between the 13th and 23rd straight into the southeast corridor. GFS model going to be a little less aggressive with the cold at times, which again, I feel like the GFS throughout history has been the more aggressive model in most instances, so more weird things with the GFS right now. We see the cold continue basically after this extremely brief warm-up, if even. For some of the southern areas, it doesn't even connect. It's mostly the northeast. We get another brief warm-up here right in front of a stronger cooldown. This is for the 19th, 18th, 19th, and then we get that more brutal cold air, followed up by even more so colder air by the 23rd, 24th here, and it stays warm in the west. Again, 10 days here between the 14th and 24th, and it's very evident this is still the trend with warmer temperatures prevailing a little bit more out west. There is colder areas, but it's prevailing much more in this corridor, certainly, than the east. But when we look at these, I mean, the GFS model might be a little more east-based with it, but same kind of consensus here, I would say. And when we look at our long-range temperature models, here's the European Extended Ensemble model. This is the 8th through the 15th, very cold. What did I say? 15th here, 15th through the 22nd. It stays that way. 22nd through the 29th. This was a big question mark before. Now very cold in the east, still on this model. And then finally, by the 29th through 5th, it looks like maybe it's pointing more towards cold in the west than the east, which would be the first time, basically. This model's been showing it since January started. GFS Extended Ensemble model, same thing, 7th through 14th here. 14th through 21st, and then here's the 21st through the 28th, still very cold. And then finally the 28th through the 4th, it looks like it backs off of the cold in the east. So same story. I don't know why, but throughout my experience with all of this, I feel like the beginning and the end of basically the beginning of a new month always tends to bring a pattern change. Not every time, but big pattern changes tend to fall on that like first date of a month for some reason. Wouldn't really shock me if the 1st of February is maybe when we finally see a little bit of a winter thaw. That would be quite interesting, but this is maybe pointing towards that. But it is very far out. Maybe it'll just continue. Who knows? CFS model, a little more aggressive of a model typically, but 9th through the 16th here, very cold. 16th through the 23rd, very cold. 23rd through the 30th, very cold. And then the 30th through the 6th, it doesn't really warm up quite as much. It's not quite as cold, but it doesn't warm up. And then even the 6th through the 13th of February is cold. And then even the 13th through the 20th is cold, even though it's the warmest time of this entire model run. But that takes us almost to the end of meteorological winter. We're 10 days away here at the end of this. So very, very positive signs if you're hoping for cold and more snow opportunities. Anyway, guys, we will keep you guys up to date. A big one coming tomorrow with the updates once that storm is forming over Texas. I'm excited to see what the models show tomorrow. And then another big one on Friday as we get the new 3 to 4 week outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. So a couple of big ones coming up soon. So be sure to subscribe. We upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.